Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 770 for June 2nd, 2019. Coming up in just a few minutes.
During my early times back on Islay, 8-9 years ago, it wasn't a thought that Port Ellen would come back, and into production. So to know the stories and the progression of conversations that I've had over the years, to now a place where I'm going back and having conversations with people, and we know now that it's going to be opening is deeply moving for me to be able to facilitate that and be a part of the project doing this.
The annual Islay Festival of Malt and Music wrapped up this weekend, and the area around the old Port Ellen Distillery got a lot of attention. We've known about Diageo's plans to revive Port Ellen for about a year and a half. But just a couple of weeks ago, the final application for planning permission was submitted to the Argyll and Bute Council for approval. And when whiskey lovers descend on Islay a year from now for Fagile 2020, construction should be well underway. Georgie Crawford is Diageo's project manager for the Port Ellen revival, and the former Lagavulin distillery manager will join us later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the calendar of events, your voice, the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and a whole lot more. All on this edition of WhiskyCast.
Make this Father's Day unforgettable with a personalized bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label. Go to reservebar.com and use code GIFTDAD for exclusive pricing on an engraved bottle. Because if anyone deserves Blue Label, it's Dad. Please drink responsibly. Johnny Walker Blue Label Blended Scotch Whisky, 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo, Norwalk, Connecticut.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Last summer was one of the hottest and driest in Scotland in many years, and we're now starting to find out what that could mean for whiskey makers. The Guardian reported this weekend that many distillers had to stop production at some point last year because of low water levels. For instance, Glenfarclas lost the entire month of September because the natural spring that supplies its water ran dry. Glenfarclas distillery manager Callum Fraser told The Guardian that there was not enough rain over the winter to replenish the River Spey or the area's springs. Scotland's Environmental Protection Agency is meeting with water company executives this week in what The Guardian calls a drought summit, out of fears that this summer could be just as bad. The other effect of a prolonged drought, lower crop yields for barley farmers, which could also affect whiskey production. Last time around, we reported on the end of punitive tariffs imposed by Canada and Mexico on American-made whiskies after the three countries agreed to a deal on steel and aluminum imports. While no official announcement has come yet from the Mexican government, don't be surprised if that country reimposes its tariffs on bourbon and other American whiskeys. That's because U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to slap all Mexican imports with a 5% tariff as soon as next week to punish Mexico for not stopping the flow of migrants trying to cross the border. The Trump administration plans to raise those tariffs by 5% a month until it's satisfied that Mexico is taking action, which means that all goods imported from Mexico could be hit with 25% tariffs on October 1st. That includes tequila, mezcal, and Mexican beers, so it would not be a surprise if Mexico reimposes its retaliatory tariffs on U.S. whiskeys. Ontario's spirits industry is welcoming a new report for the province's finance ministry. As we've noted many times over the years, Ontario's provincial liquor monopoly, the LCBO, is one of the world's largest buyers and sellers of whiskey and other distilled spirits. but it's also regarded as an inefficient and limited way to manage whiskey sales. While there have been numerous calls to privatize the LCBO in the past, the report recommends against that, but it does call for gradually opening up the Ontario market with more privately owned stores. The LCBO has 663 stores in the province, along with 209 so-called agency stores that are located in smaller towns not big enough to support a full LCBO store. But the province only has 2.4 liquor stores for every 10,000 people. By comparison, Quebec also has a provincial monopoly system, but it has 12.2 stores for every 10,000 people. You may never have heard of John Manfreda, but he was one of the most important people in the whiskey industry. He was the longtime administrator of the U.S. Treasury Department's Tax and Trade Bureau, which regulates almost every aspect of the U.S. whiskey industry. John Manfreda passed away last Saturday at the age of 73. Turning now to new whiskeys, the Macallan is adding a new single malt distilled from barley grown on its Easter Elchies estate in Speyside. The Macallan Estate will be released starting next month with a recommended retail price of £195 in the UK. There's no word yet on the U.S. pricing. White & Mackay's latest release technically is not a whiskey. It's unveiled a light spirit drink bottled at 21.5% ABV. The idea is to give consumers something that tastes like whiskey with a lower alcohol level. It'll be sold at Tesco stores in the UK for about £12 a bottle. Buffalo Trace has released the second whiskey in its Old Charter Oak Bourbon series. The French Oak release is the follow-up to last year's Mongolian Oak Bourbon. It'll be available in limited amounts with a recommended retail price of $69.99 a bottle. Another group of lifestyle gurus have jumped into the whiskey business. James Bond and John Buscemi have teamed up with Charbet Distilleries' Marco Karakasevich to release Wolves Whiskey. Karakasevich is known for distilling whiskeys from fully hopped and brewed beer, and the first run edition of Wolves blends an 8-year-old double-distilled stout matured in French oak casks, along with a 5-year-old whiskey distilled from Pilsner and a rye whiskey. It's available only through the online retailers ReserveBar.com and Flaviar.com at a price tag of $150 a bottle. And let's take this final story with a grain of salt. That's because North Korea claims to have produced its first whiskey. It's well known that the North Korean government has tried to get around Western trade sanctions for years, and the list of banned goods includes whiskeys. It's also well known that Kim Jong-un has a taste for fine spirits and wine. A Chinese tour organizer is reporting that Samilpo Distillery will release 3 different versions of its whiskey in North Korea later this year. While we don't know how old the whiskey is, what grain it was actually made from, and even whether or what kind of barrels it was matured in, the North Koreans claim it reduces liver damage and other negative side effects of drinking alcohol. Somehow, I don't think we're going to be posting tasting notes for this one at WhiskyCast.com, though that is where you can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long. The news is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Keeping American whiskey history and tradition alive isn't just a marketing slogan, it's part of Heaven Hill's fabric. When other distillers were getting out of the rye whiskey business, Heaven Hill saved the legendary Rittenhouse rye from becoming a footnote in the history books. Today it's the rye whiskey of choice, in a cocktail or neat, with a distinct spicy flavor all its own. Find out more at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. The Kentucky Bourbon Affair takes over Louisville this week from the 4th through the 8th, and the Bourbon Salon is on June 11th at Oxmoor Farm in Louisville, too. Whiskies of the World is this Friday and Saturday in Dallas, Texas, and Ardbeg Day 2019 wraps up this coming Sunday with a Scottish Caribbean Carnival in Berlin, Germany. Westport Whiskey and Wine in Louisville hosts Wild Turkey's Jimmy and Eddie Russell on June 13th for an open bar night and bottle signing just ahead of Father's Day. Whiskey Live Brisbane is June 14th and 15th in Brisbane, Australia, and the Bedfordshire Whiskey Festival is June 16th in Leighton Buzzard, England. The Whiskey Exchange has a Kilkerran tasting with Ronald Watson at its Fitzrovia store in London on June 18th. And while the Whiskey Jubilee is no more, the New York City Kiddush Fest will take its place on June 19th at Battery Gardens. Finally, the Erin Malt and Music Festival is June 28th through the 30th in La Cranza, Scotland. Right now, we have 195 different events worldwide on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. Just click on the search button to find out what's going on near you or wherever you'll be traveling soon. Grab a bourbon and settle into a good story. Heaven Hill's Backroom Stories, told by those who've rarely shared before just how they shape the spirit and just how the spirit shapes them.
All the barrels are aging here. A lot of the airflow through the warehouse like this, when you open the door, all that goodness hits you in the face. And, it's something you never forget.
Download and listen to the new podcast, Tales from the Hill, from Heaven Hill Distillery. It's coming soon to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlach Single Malt Scotch Whisky. The crowds are starting to leave Islay now that this year's Fégile is over. This year's Islay Festival marked the first for the new Ardnahoe Distillery near Port Ellen, bringing the total number of working distilleries on the island to 9. That's expected to become 10 a couple of years from now, assuming that all goes as scheduled with the revival of Diageo's Port Ellen Distillery. The plan to revive Port Ellen, along with Brora Distillery in the Highlands, was announced back in October of 2017. But it took until last month for the final Port Ellen plans to be submitted to the Argyll and Bute Council for approval. When the project was unveiled, Georgie Crawford was managing Lagavulin Distillery, just down the road from Port Ellen. Since then, she's been given the job of project manager for the Port Ellen revival, and even though it's been a hectic week on the island, we had a chance to catch up on Friday. It's been a fun week on Islay for you guys with the Fèis, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been our annual Whiskey Festival. We started last Friday with events at Port Ellen Maltings, where we touched on Port Ellen Distillery. Then we had Lagavulin Day, Saturday. Obviously, we have Bruichladdich Day, also happens on the island Sunday, and then you keep going through Sucalila Monday, and then sort of all the other distilleries thereafter. There's been highs and lows with the weather. Some of us have had great days, other days have been a wee bit dreich, like today. Today's Friday, which is Bunnahabhain's Day, and it is a bit drizzly out.
But that's just future whiskey, though.
Absolutely. We are delighted to see the rain. The visitors, possibly not so much, but certainly the distilleries do need that for the production to continue.
Now, one of the things I noticed looking at this year's schedule was that they stuck Ardnahoe in on the same day as Bowmore, What are they going to do when you guys get Port Ellen open? Are we going to just keep piling days on top of each other instead of making the phase longer?
Yeah, so what we did this year to try and see how it would work was we actually brought the maltings day forward to the Friday. And that was a deliberate move to see if that would work for us. So when the distillery is up and running, that we would have it on the Friday as well. So we've done that this year to see how it will work. We'll do a bit of a wash-up once the festival's completely over and see what the plan is going forward for that.
And that makes a natural transition to the distillery plans. How are things coming along? I know you've submitted the plans to Argyll and Bute Council.
Yeah, so the plans went into Argyll and Bute Council about 2 weeks ago. So that's a huge milestone for us within the project plan. And they now have 3 months to respond back. That's the sort of shortest time that we can expect that to come back with. Hopefully, everything going forward within that time frame will allow us to keep moving forward with the plan, so that we have. Hopefully, and I'm not going to be tied to any dates at this point, but we're hoping then for completion by 2021. And
that is a little bit beyond what was the original plan when it was announced in 2017. The goal originally was to have the new Port Ellen open by next year in 2020. What happened over that time period?
Yeah, so there's been a bit of an evolution, really, in the plans since we first announced, as you know, in October 2017. Part of that has been around the fact that we've also announced £150 million expansion in our visitor centres, and we're very lucky that over here, one of the visitor centres that is going to get a huge portion of that and change the experience there is Kalila. So we're trying to manage projects, but actually it's given us the time to do some further investigation into the history of Port Ellen, which has thrown up some really interesting stories from the past that now is changing what we want to do with the future. So it's allowed us time to really do the planning element of it properly, I think, and we're all really comfortable that we've got to that place and that we're now working to this timeline. But certainly giving us the extra time has allowed us to look at doing something quite different with the Port Ellen build now.
And let's go into that. What is different? We know that you have the old kiln building that everybody can see when you visit the island, and we know about the warehouses that are still along the shore. But there really wasn't much left of the actual distillery itself, so you're really sort of starting from scratch here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you say, we are going to retain and reimagine both some of the warehouses and the kiln building as part of it, but the other older buildings that are there are more office and workshop buildings. So there will be a huge element of new build happening. But what we're trying to do is obviously the main part of the project, certainly at the very beginning, was about recreating Port Ellen and trying to make as true a character that the fans around the world know today and love today. And that still is our main focus, and we will be recreating the exact still design that was in there between the 60s and 80s to be able to do that. But as we started to really look further back in the history of the distillery that was there, it started out in 1825, that actually it was quite a place of experimentation. We looked at the stories around how the first Scottish spirit safes were trialled and experimented with at Port Ellen Distillery, as well as the what we now refer to as the patent or Kofi still. Experiments were done again at Port Ellen Distillery and that, and it made us really realise that through its different periods of production, it was a place of experimentation, and it was a distillery that was really looking to the future. And so we decided to bring some of that element into the new build. So although our main focus is still to make Port Ellen, actually we're going to be putting in a set of experimental stills to be looking to make experimental liquids for the future as well, alongside the main Port Ellen product, which is incredibly exciting.
What was some of the interesting things that you found in the archives? Because I know you did some extensive research in Diageo's archives to look at the history of Port Ellen. What were some of the things you found?
Yeah, so So it's quite amazing how old some of the documents that we've found have been. So we managed to find documents from the 1800s, which really pretty much writes out what production methods they were using at that time and how they were processing as far back as the early 1800s. And these are all beautiful handwritten documents that have been written in Old Scots that we've translated back to try and understand today how they were processing. And it's quite amazing when you look at these that so much of it is exactly the same as we do today. Technology maybe changes, but the basics of what we want to do and what we want to achieve has not hugely changed. So we're looking to some of these documents as well as some of the old design as well. We're very lucky that the very famous whisky architect Charles Doig also did work on Port Ellen, and there's a lot of drawings from around the early 1900s that show us a lot. So really the layout of the buildings that we're looking at today, which will make like a lovely courtyard with the old kiln building at the top of the courtyard shape, that is actually what they had in the more Victorian design rather than they had in the more modern 60s to 80s design. And then of course when we look to that distillery that was there from the 60s to the 80s, we actually have the full design layout information, everything from every pump, valve, conveyor that was in that distillery. So we've been able to look at all of that. And alongside that, of course, we also have a huge liquid archive, and we've been working with our technical team and our blenders to truly understand the characters of the spirit that was being made then, the characters in the new make spirit, looking at things like the malt results from the maltings and peating levels that were happening at that time, right through to really analysing the spirit that we currently have as well and bottlings that we've done. So huge amount of information to go through to really support what we want to do in the future.
And you also have some of a few of the veterans of the old Port Ellen left, like Ian MacArthur, that you can rely on for some of that information too, right?
Yeah, so we've had sessions with all the old operators that are still within our community. We brought them in and we've had conversations to really get a sense of not just the production, but what the place was like. And I think although they would love to talk all hours about the process and the production, actually what I came away with was the sense of community. And that was the big sort of lasting feeling after speaking to them, was that really it was a place that was a community, a home from home for all of them, and how much they loved working at the distillery and how it made them feel. So we've had some great conversations with these guys just to truly understand Port Ellen, the place. And of course, the likes of Ian, anytime I've got a question about anything, it's really easy to get into conversation with Ian and understand. And he filled, all the casks during that time that Port Ellen was open from the 60s to 80s. So he's been a font of wisdom and information as well. And of course, we have also done outreach into the community as well, and consultation with the community in open forum around the plans, where we've shared the plans for the future and discussed what we plan to do with the distillery and take feedback as well from the community, because obviously the distillery is a huge part of the community and the village.
And what was that feedback? What did you hear from the folks in Port Ellen and around Islay, given that there has been some concern about putting a lot more distilling capacity on the island in general, just because of the lack of infrastructure?
Yeah, to be honest with you, the feedback we've had from all the community conversations we've had has been hugely positive. We understand there are challenges on Islay. So what we do, obviously, as a business is collectively distilleries are working with the Scotch Whisky Association to be able to pull information together and work within the community in Islay to support the future of the island. And the other thing, of course, that I'll be doing and have been doing already locally is working with our community council. So, we are having meetings and regular conversations on the distillery and the bigger sort of conversations on the island at the moment. So, but as I say, overall, really, really positive to see the sort of what was a real vital part of Port Ellen coming back to life.
So what are you going to do with the old buildings?
Yeah, so the shoreside warehouses, which we have two of, one of those will be part warehouse and part visitor experience. So we will be opening out that area at the very front to take advantage of the lovely views across the bay there, and we'll be landscaping all the land around there. So not only is it a space for the visitors to use, but actually for the community to use as well, because it actually leads down onto a beautiful wee beach down on that side of the village. And then the old kiln building, again, will become part of our visitor experience areas as well. So we will weave them in. Although we're going for quite a modern build, obviously it's a brand new building, we are trying to take some of the design elements and shapes of the warehouses that are already there. So some of the buildings, the roofs will take the same form, and so it looks quite natural within the landscape. The full set of warehouses on the side of the road beside the maltings and distillery, they will continue as warehouses, and over time we will slowly remove the Lagavulin that's in there, because we'll be starting to fill them with Port Ellen, because we will have the ability to cask fill, and we will be doing cask filling on the site, and we'll start to fill them up with the new Port Ellen stocks.
Where are you going to put the Lagavulin stuff that's maturing now? Are you going to have to put some warehouses on the island, or are you going to have to take those to the mainland?
They'll probably naturally come away as we need them anyway, so we'll start to target taking them as we need them. We still have warehouses at Lagavulin as well, but hopefully, Mark, they'll end up in your glass, the liquid that's in those warehouses.
But I mean in the future Lagavulin stock, because you've been using that space, those warehouses for Lagavulin for a number of years now. Will you have to do something else in terms of a place to put Lagavulin stock, or will it go to the mainland?
No, the majority of the stock does go to the mainland as it is. There's only a small amount of casks that actually can be housed. I don't think it's anything more than 7,000 casks that can actually be housed within these warehouses here. So it's a very small portion of the overall casks maturing with Lagavulin. Okay.
Just wanted to sort of clarify that, because we've known that those warehouses have been used for Lagavulin since the old Port Ellen stocks ran out of there. And obviously you're going to have some place on the island to keep some stock. And that'll be at the Lagavulin warehouse? At
Lagavulin. Yeah, so at Lagavulin Distillery itself, they will optimise all the warehousing that is on the site there to house as much as possible on the island. But as we already do, much of it will be matured on the mainland.
Will all the Port Ellen stock be on the island, or will some of that go to the mainland as well?
It'll be a bit of a mix. So with the main Port Ellen product that we're making, there'll be a mix of casks on the island and casks off the island. And with the experimental, because it will be in much less volume, all the liquid that's created through the experimental stills will be cask filled on the island, and then portions of it will remain with us on Islay, and portions of it will go away, where our blenders obviously can have first-hand overview of the maturation of these liquids.
As we've discussed before, you are a native Islay and trace your ancestry back to the Lords of the Isles in those days. What does this mean to you personally to see this distillery revived, knowing that you probably used to ride your bike down by there when you were a little girl on the island and grew up around this place?
Yeah, absolutely. As children, we did play around the area quite a lot. And, for a period of time, I actually lived in the houses right opposite where the distillery is today. So it's a huge honour for me, obviously, to be a part of this. I think, obviously, working in the industry, I've been very lucky. And one of the things that I enjoy most about my job is speaking to people and learning about the history of whisky making on Islay and within the distilleries, and getting those stories and understanding of what it was like. So to have had these stories with people who, during my early times back on Islay, 8-9 years ago, it wasn't a thought that Port Ellen would come back, and into production. So to know the stories and the progression of conversations that I've had over the years, to now a place where I'm going back and having conversations with people, and we know now that it's going to be opening, is deeply moving for me to be able to facilitate that and be a part of the project doing this. It's a huge thing, not just for Port Ellen and the industry, but I think really for the bigger whisky industry, because of the history that Port Ellen has within the bigger Scotch whisky industry.
When this plan was announced back in 2017 in October, I talked with Nick Morgan about it, and he told me at the time that the entire Port Ellen Brora revival project was essentially done behind closed doors with only a handful of people within all of Diageo knowing exactly what was coming. What did you think when you first heard, when you were down at Lagavulin at the time, that Port Ellen was going to be revived?
It's so difficult to put words on it. I think we were just bursting with excitement about it. Islay's a very small place, as you know. I think we had hints that there was something going on, because people can't come to Islay to look at buildings and assess things without being noticed. So there certainly had been a bit of, acknowledgement that there was maybe something happening. But, this is a sort of thing that in the background you would hope over the years many times might be happening, and you don't ever imagine it would actually come to fruition. But that day I remember especially going and speaking to Ian and his brother, actually, Billy, who also worked at Port Ellen, who at that time worked at Lagavulin too, just going and being able to say it to them and to see, the look on their faces. There was no initial understanding that actually this was going to happen. It took quite a while to sink in, and I remember actually sitting in the still house. Billy was sat on the steps just between the stills at Lagavulin, and I was sat on the bench at the spirit safe, and we were just, blown away by it and just sitting there. And that's where we started really. He started reminiscing and talking about what it was like to work there. And it was really, I'll never forget that moment sitting down in the still house with Billy and Ian and myself at Lagavulin discussing that morning's announcement and what it would mean for the future. It was just very special.
Did you have a dram to toast it?
Oh, absolutely. The day of the announcement actually was my birthday. So we had a double celebration that night when we were out.
Oh, great. So what did Ian say? I imagine there were a few tears, but I imagine he also had something to say.
Yeah, Ian, as you will know, is quite a chatty character. To be honest with you, it was probably one of the first times I saw him quite speechless. I think Ian was, very devastated is maybe too big a word, but when Port Ellen closed, that was where he had worked from basically leaving school. Ian will be working, I think next August 4th, it will be 50 years, that Ian's been working, and his first job was at Port Ellen, and he did such an amazing job there looking after all the casks and all the fillings. So I think for him to understand that, in his lifetime, he's going to see this back in production was such a big thing. And, I'm absolutely so excited at the thought of him coming again and filling the first casks for us at Port Ellen when it reopens. It'll be such an honour to be there with him doing that.
So do you get to be the first manager?
I think it's difficult to say right now exactly what all the roles will be, but absolutely, my heart is set on being down at the distillery once we've got the project completed and we're starting to commission liquid.
As Georgie mentioned during our conversation, the Argyll and Bute Council has 3 months to review the planning application for Port Ellen and either approve or reject it. That's expected sometime in mid-August. We'll keep you posted as developments take place. WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies, comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with one of the recent Port Ellen bottlings from Diageo's Special Releases series. The 2014 edition was a 35-year-old single malt, bottled at 56.5% ABV. The nose has notes of grilled fruits, campfire smoke, lemon, honey, vanilla, and just a hint of dark chocolate. The taste is peppery and intense with black pepper and a hint of cinnamon. The spices fade slowly to reveal hints of smoke, grilled fruits, dark chocolate, and honey. Water amplifies the spices while downplaying the sweeter notes, and the finish is amazingly long with lingering spices. I'm scoring the 2014 release of the Port Ellen 35-year-old a 95. And since the Fagial is wrapping up, let's look at the new Bruichladdich Islay Barley 2011 single malt. It's distilled from barley grown on Islay back in 2011, and it's bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has a soft smokiness along with heather, grilled pineapple, and a hint of lemon zest. The taste is peppery, with a good balance of fruity notes underneath, and a soft smokiness, while a hint of brine rounds out the palate. The finish is long and gentle, with subtle spices and a hint of grilled fruits. I'm scoring the Bruichladdich Islay Barley 2011 edition a 93. Balblair unveiled its new age statement range of single malts this spring. The 12-year-old is matured in a combination of ex-bourbon and double-fired American oak casks, and it's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has notes of dried orange slices, along with vanilla cream, subtle spices, and a hint of sawdust. The taste has a good mix of spices and citrus with touches of clove, allspice, and white pepper, balanced by orange peel and hints of honey and chocolate in the background. The finish has lingering spices and touches of chocolate and orange peel. I'm scoring the new Balblair 12-year-old single malt a 92. Finally, we recently mentioned the death of Amrut chairman Neil Jagdale. He selected one final Chairman's Reserve bottling of Greedy Angels before his passing, and it's now been dedicated in his memory. The 10-year-old peated single malt is one of the oldest Amrut has ever bottled. It was matured for the first 7 years in a first-fill Pedro Jimenez sherry cask, with the final 3 years in a combination of ex-bourbon and a small virgin oak cask. It's bottled at 60% ABV. The nose has a kiss of smoke along with notes of cherries, caramel candy, hints of white pepper and chili powder, dark fruits, and oak tannins. The taste is thick, oaky, and intensely spicy, with chili powder and white pepper notes, along with cherry cobbler and a hint of toffee. The finish? It's long, oaky, and spicy. I'm scoring the Amrut Greedy Angels 10-year-old peated sherry cask a 92. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 2,600 different whiskeys from around the world. Check it out today at WhiskyCast.com.
Make this Father's Day an unforgettable one. Mark the moment with a personalized bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label, a luxurious blend of some of the rarest and most exceptional whiskeys, sourced from Johnnie Walker's unparalleled reserves. Let Dad know how much he means to you with a personalized engraving on the bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label. Go to reservebar.com and use code GIFTDAD for an exclusive pricing on an engraved bottle. Because if anyone deserves Blue Label, it's Dad. Please drink responsibly. Johnnie Walker Blue Label, blended Scotch Whisky, 40% alcohol by volume, imported by Diageo, Norwalk, Connecticut.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. As you might expect, there was a lot of reaction to last week's interview with Alec Lee, the co-founder and creator of Glyph, a so-called molecular whiskey. John Wendell at All I Can Do on Twitter had this response. The feature interview was similar to a mediocre job interview for a position you're not really qualified for. Sorry, Glyph. Thank you for your interest, but you were not chosen for this position. Please do not contact us again. At Boskurt Karasu was not impressed with one of the analogies that Alec Lee used to compare Glyph to regular whiskeys. Well, I had an issue with the traditional music versus electronic music comparison, actually. If electronic music was trying to mimic and replicate exactly the traditional music practice, instead of offering something new and fresh, nobody would bother to listen to it. Just saying. Mac Married John had this response from the UK. I found the whole discussion fascinating. Looking ahead, could they replicate a whiskey from the past? Who would own it? Can you copyright a molecular makeup? They gave the music analogy. Could a whiskey cover ever be as good or as special as the original? Johan van Dijk in Belgium had this comment on our Facebook page. Wow, that was an interesting WhiskyCast In-Depth indeed, Mark. I'm not into buying a bottle of Glyph yet. However, ordering a set of, let's say, 50 Shades of Glyph tasting notes could probably help develop my internal tasting library. Johan, I don't think you're going to see that one at Amazon anytime soon. And we'll wrap it up with Mike Simpson of Edmonton, Alberta, who posted this comment. Listened to the episode, and while it was interesting to listen to, Alec came across, at least to me, as someone completely indifferent to the industry with intentions to only make money and nothing else. I found myself becoming angrier with him as the interview went on. I was curious if your temperament changed at all while interviewing him. No, Mike, it didn't. I've been doing interviews like this for a long time, and hopefully you'll never be able to tell if I'm getting mad during an interview. If I do, it'll be obvious. If you have a question, a suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can always send an email. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. I spend some time each week answering whiskey questions on Quora.com, and there was an interesting one this week that might puzzle some longtime whiskey lovers, unless you've been to a cooperage. The question was, how does a wooden cask stay sealed for so many years without leaking? Well, if you look at the staves that make up a barrel, they're not cut square at a 90-degree angle. They're mitered so that the staves fit together to form a circle, but that also increases the wood-on-wood contact and prevents leaking. Oak also swells slightly when it gets wet, and the combination of swelling and the steel hoops that are hammered into place makes it difficult for any of the liquid to leak out. Of course, there are leaks that come up from time to time, and that's why warehouse workers inspect casks on a regular basis. Now the question, why oak? Well, the structure of oak is just porous enough to allow a small amount of air to be exchanged between the inside and the outside of the barrel, while keeping the liquid inside from leaking out. Other types of wood are much too porous to hold liquid over time when they're made into barrels. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. And that's also where you'll find links for our WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast and our WhiskyCast HD videos, the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the whiskey photo of the week, and a whole lot more, including a complete archive of our past episodes going all the way back to 2005. We'd love to hear from you this week. You can get in touch with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
WhiskyCast Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Make this Father's Day unforgettable with a personalized bottle of Johnnie Walker Blue Label. Go to reservebar.com and use code GIFTDAD for exclusive pricing on an engraved bottle. Because if anyone deserves Blue Label, it's Dad. Please drink responsibly. Johnnie Walker Blue Label blended Scotch Whisky, 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo, Norwalk, Connecticut.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2019, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.